Welcome back to GFXRhino. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Camera Raw filter inside of Photoshop. Camera Raw filter is a powerful tool that provides advanced adjustments for refining images. Often used by photographers to edit raw photos, we're going to be using it to enhance these raw renders by adjusting the color balance, exposure, sharpness, effects, and all these different things using the Camera Raw filter. We can really fine-tune our 3D renders and make them more visually appealing. Camera Raw filter gives you precision all from one Camera Raw filter menu. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, it does actually work inside of the free alternative Photopea, where there is a Camera Raw filter feature available, but it has nowhere near as many features as the actual Photoshop one does. So you'll still kind of be able to follow along with some of this tutorial, but a lot of the features won't be there. And I just want to make it clear, I'm not going to be going over every feature of the Camera Raw filter, because as you'll see, I'll show you right here, there's a whole lot of different features. There's all these different menus, and then in some of them, there's like, if we go into like optics, there's even like defringe, there's all these like other extra menus and things that you can go over. There's even all of these when I was researching this video. There's even all of these I noticed that I've never really used before, where you can like use AI and stuff to remove certain parts of the scene like that. You know, it doesn't work very well, but you know, it's still crazy that there's all of these things and more down here. You can save settings and stuff. I didn't even realize that too. You can save your Camera Raw filter settings and all of this different stuff. So it's a really complex sort of thing. The stuff that I use, because I don't really use too much advanced stuff in the Camera Raw filter, so I'll just be kind of going over the basics in a way, but a little bit more than basics, because there is things like these color gradings and the color mixer that I did only recently learn. So there's these two things that are a little bit more advanced that I'll still be teaching you how to do. So just all the things that I use inside of Camera Raw filter, because as I said before, Camera Raw filter is very powerful for adding some very easy, I think it's pretty easy, because you have all these different things here all in one menu. So I'd call it easy. I'd call it pretty simple, especially after you get the hang of it. It's super easy to add, you know, just adjust all the lighting and colors and everything in your scene from one menu. Before we begin, make sure to join the GFXRhino Discord server. We're almost at 1,000 members. First link in the description below. So let's just jump right into the video. So starting off, the first thing you want to make sure is that your layer is a smart object. You can right click on it and then do convert to smart object, which will give it this little icon in the corner. The reason we do that is if you go ahead and apply a Camera Raw filter on a smart object, so I'll just do a quick little exposure there. It doesn't look good at all, but you can see that you actually have your Camera Raw filter here under the smart filters, which you can, you know, move it to another layer if you'd like. You can obviously just drag it over to the delete trash bin there if you want to delete it. You can double click on it to open it up, and then you come back and you can adjust all of that. And this is a non-destructive workflow, meaning it's not actually destroying your layer. It's not actually applying it directly on the layer, because at any time you can just hide it. You can go back and edit it, you can delete it, you can move it to other layers, and that's how you want to try your best to work. As in Photoshop, you want to try work as non-destructively as possible. Whereas if you have it as a rasterized layer, so it doesn't have that icon there, if we go ahead and add some Camera Raw filter things here, I'll just do a quick few little adjustments. If we apply that, you'll see that it applies it directly to the layer, and we can't actually change the effects. We can't delete them. They're applied directly on the layer, which is, as I said, not how you want to work, because let's say you add some shading, you add some other things, and you realize, oh yeah, it's just too bright, right? You'd have to put your raw render back in here, and you'd have to reapply all of the Camera Raw filter effects. It's a big hassle, so you just want to make sure that it is converted to a smart object right there. And now after that, of course, you can go up to filter and then Camera Raw filter, and we can get started with all of the different settings and things inside of here. So first of all, under light is all of these different exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and black. So of course the first one is exposure, which you can probably already guess what that is. It's just increasing the sort of overall brightness of the scene, and of course you can decrease that as well. It depends on your scene. A lot of the time I do increase it up just a little bit, just 0.35. Sometimes I'll even go all the way up to like 0.85. It really depends on the scene, of course, which I do want to make that clear. It obviously does depend on the scene. There's no like exact like Camera Raw filter settings that you can use for every scene. It really does just depend on the scene, so you always need to come in and just adjust all of them. So of course for this scene, I'm going to do about 0.3 there. I think that does look pretty nice. Actually, that's another thing I'll say here is, before I did the research for this video, I didn't actually know what a lot of this stuff was actually doing. Like, I could just see if it looked good, and then if it did, I'd apply it, sort of thing. I'd use it. So I just want to put that out there, is that when you kind of get better at GFX, you start to get a better eye for what looks good and what doesn't, and then you don't really need to know what you're actually doing. You just kind of, that's what I do at least, right? Is I just kind of look at it, and if it looks good, yeah, okay, I'll keep that. If it doesn't, then I won't keep it. You know, it's kind of that simple. But anyway, I don't know if you want to listen to that. Anyway, back to what we were saying. There's of course the contrast as well. This is just the difference between the light and dark areas of the scene. So turning this up really makes the darks in the scene kind of blur together a lot more. So you can see when we had it there, you can see a lot more detail. if you turn that up, the darks kind of get darker and the lights kind of get lighter in a way. Whereas if you turn that down, a lot more sort of detail and stuff comes out, but it does look a lot more flat. It doesn't have as much depth. Usually I don't mess around with contrast too much. Maybe I'll increase it a little bit or decrease it just a little bit. Really does depend on the scene, as I said before, but there will be extra ways we'll go over later for making more clarity, so you don't need to worry about all of the different details and things. If you do want to have a pretty high contrast scene, there will be something later on that I'll show you that can bring out the texture and stuff a lot more. So I'll just leave that at about maybe +10. I think that looks all right. So the highlight, shadows, whites and blacks, you might see kind of all do a pretty similar thing. They kind of adjust, you know, the shadows and the blacks are kind of the darker parts of the scene, and the whites and the highlights are obviously sort of brighter parts of the scene. So the difference between the highlight, shadows and whites and blacks is the highlights is adjusting the brightness of the brightest parts of the image, but doesn't actually touch true white stuff, which by true white I mean things that are literally, it's 255, 255, 255. If you don't, it's pure white, like exactly the white color. It's adjusting the brightest parts in the scene, but not the actual white color, if that makes sense. Shadows is the same, but for the brightness of the darkest areas of the images without touching the true blacks. And for whites and blacks, the white is adjusting the brightest tones of the image to control the upper end of the tonal range. I don't know what that means, but yeah. And then the blacks adjust the darkest tones of the image to control the lower end of the tonal range. I don't know what that means, but yeah, mess around with those, see what you can get. Usually I'll actually bring the shadows and the blacks up a lot more, just because it brings a lot more clarity to the scene, I like to think. And we can adjust the whites. I usually just do something like this, but I don't really like to have them all up like that, because realistically you should probably be putting like some of them down. Whatever you want to do, just mess around with them and get whatever look you think looks good. At any time you can just hold down this eyeball button right here and you'll see what it looks like without those effects. So I think we've done a pretty nice job at making things a little bit more brighter, a little bit clearer to see, but I still do think it looks a lot more bland. So we'll go on to adjusting the color here. Here we've of course got the temperature and tint, which you can probably already tell what it does just by looking at the slider. If we drag this one more to the right, it's going to get a lot more yellow. We drag it more to the left, it's going to get a lot more blue. Same for the tint right here, we can make it a lot more green and a lot more purple. Here you obviously don't want to make that big of changes, you just want to slightly move them. I'm going to make mine a little bit more blue, since as you can see my scene is already pretty blue. If we just make it a little bit more blue, you can also mess around with this, or maybe we want to make it a little bit more green. Whatever you want to do, you can mess around with that. Yeah, you can mess around with those, change up your colors, but as I said, yeah, just make some very slight adjustments to that. I'll just make mine a little bit more blue, and then these two here are probably the I wasn't going to say most important, but definitely not. They are just the saturation and vibrance sliders. So the difference between saturation and vibrance, because as you can see, they almost do the same thing, but they don't exactly do the same thing. So the difference is saturation boosts the intensity of all colors equally. So all of the colors in the scene are getting more saturated with that. Whereas with vibrance, it increases the saturation selectively, focusing more on undersaturated colors and protecting skin tones. So you can see as I increase the vibrance, the skin tones are sort of staying the same. Everything is sort of staying the same, except for the stuff that's already really desaturated. You can use a mix of both of these. I like to just do a little bit of saturation, maybe a little bit of vibrance. I usually don't use vibrance that much though, but it is always very nice to bring up the saturation a bunch in your scene, because that's what really makes it pop. And then of course you can mess around with the temperature and whatever else you want to mess around with there. Next is effects. Now this one is very, very cool. Before, when I talked about contrast and how when you increase it, it kind of removes more of the details. This one right here, texture, is what brings out a lot of the details. This is what really makes your scene look very, very crisp. It's effects. It looks amazing, right? So the texture here, of course, when you increase that, it's going to bring out a whole lot more texture in the scene, which is really, really cool. It is pretty easy to overdo this though. I have seen a lot of scenes and stuff where the texture is just bumped up to the maximum, and there's just so there's too much texture, right? So it is nice to just add a little bit of texture, make things a little bit more clear. Talking about clear, actually clarity, there's also this one which brings out a lot more clarity in the scene. It doesn't look too good in this scene right here, but it does look good, especially in some darker scenes and stuff like that. So we can mess around with the texture, the clarity. There's dehaze, which if you didn't know, haze is almost like the blurriness from the sun in a way. It's hard to explain, I don't even know, bro, but the dehaze is also another super nice one to use. As I said, you don't want to overdo the texture, you don't want to overdo the clarity, you don't want to overdo the dehaze, because it can get very, very messy. Next, there's of course the vignette, which there is actually another vignette setting down somewhere else. There's another vignette. This vignette, I don't know the difference between the two, but this one adds quite a, I don't know how to describe this one, but you can see the vignette there. If you increase it more, it gives you quite a nice white vignette. If you decrease it, it gives you more of a black one. As I said before, there is actually another whole vignette. If we go somewhere somewhere along here, there should be another vignette. Under optics here, we've got a vignette here too, which this one's a lot softer, I think. So I usually use this one here, but we'll come back to this whole optics thing later. Let's just continue at the effects right here. In fact, we don't really need to, because that's pretty much all of the effects that I use. There's of course grain as well, if you want to make your scene really grainy. That can be, as I said in my other video, grain and noise and stuff can be pretty cool for horror effects, horror scenes. So you can mess around with all those effects there. Next up is curves. I don't use this very much, but there is actually like all of these different ones here that I might use in the future. I say all these different ones, there's 3. So linear is just the straight line. You can of course add multiple points, and you can mess around with the different, you know, I've never really got to learn curves because I don't really use it much. But as I said, there are all these like medium contrast, strong contrast, which you might want to use, which gives you just these presets almost. And I learned recently that you can even adjust like the red channel, the RGB channels here. So you want to make the reds in your scene brighter, or I guess it's not even making them brighter, it's just changing the color of them a little bit. I don't really know. I don't use curves too much, so we can mess around with these colors if we'd like, but I don't think that is something we're going to use. That's one thing you can do as well, is you can actually hold down Alt and then just click on it and it'll reset it. So if we want to maybe reset our light here, color, yeah, I'm going to make it a little bit more saturated. Going to mess around with it just a little bit. I don't want to actually make it too blue. I might even make it a little bit yellow to make it pop a bit more maybe. I don't know. No, we'll leave it. We'll leave that. We actually won't adjust the temper too much. More exposure though. I'll make highlights and the white not as bright, but I'll make shadows and the blacks a little lighter. So I think that looks pretty nice there. Then we got the color mixer. This is a very, very recent one I've learned. We've got the hue, the saturation, the luminance, and I don't really use all here, but this is adjusting all of it in one little menu there. I usually just switch between them. So the luminance, you can probably already get the idea of it. We have the reds, orange, yellows, greens, aquas, blues, purples, and magentas in our scene. So if we look like, I'll look at the hat here, for example, the sort of reds on here. If we increase the luminance, it's going to increase how bright just the reds are in the scene. So that does include other things though. You can see the boat like around here, it gets a little bit brighter because this is going to be considered more red. If we decrease it, you can see it is quite a red color. So that's being counted when we increase that. So it just is increasing the brightness of all the reds in the scene, especially if we look at that necklace right there. I'm pretty sure that's pretty pure red color. You can see, yeah, as I increase that, it adjusts the brightness on all of that. So that's the luminance. That's how bright it is. You can make it darker, of course, whatever you want to do with that. So I want to make it brighter, for example. You can of course do the same thing for the saturation, as you're increasing the saturation of just the reds in the scene. So we can make it very saturated and get a very saturated red color here. Same for the hue, is you're changing it more. So this is more pink and this is more orange. You can see, so if we make it more orange, we can make it more pinkish, sort of purplish there. If you want to mess around with those hues, the saturations of each of the different colors, as I said, there's all these different colors here. We've got orange too. It is kind of nice in some sense to mess around with the orange for the skin color specifically, because making skin colors pop a lot more is a really nice way to bring a lot more, just make your scene look a lot better, which I think you also mess around with the yellows a little bit. You can see you can make that more yellow there, make that more saturated. We can make it a little bit more brighter if we want to, like that. But obviously this isn't just applying to the skin. In fact, just increasing that a little bit, I think we're getting a nice skin tone there. But of course that's not applying to just the skin as well, it's also applying to the rest of the scene. So you kind of got to be careful with what you're doing with this. But it is nice if you do have some very bold colors, like as I said with this necklace right here. If this was like the only bit of red in the scene, I can make that really pink, I can make that orange, and then I can make it super saturated and super bright. Whatever you want to do, you can mess around with colors a lot. So that's a pretty nice menu. I sometimes use that and I sometimes don't. So yeah, that is something that you can use just to make slight adjustments to each of the colors in the scene. If you want to make, like as I said, the reds more saturated, maybe the blues, maybe you want to make the water down here very saturated while the rest of the scene stays pretty normal. You can make the like ocean here. So yeah, kind of messing with just the ocean. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, it can be pretty good, but it can also be a little bit, you know, annoying since it's not applying to just a specific part of the scene, it's applying to the whole scene. I don't know, but the color mixer is very cool. I love the color mixer. I'm gonna try to start using it a lot more. Next up is the color grading. This is one I don't use at all. I've kind of tried to understand it or learn it, but essentially we've got the midtones, the shadows, and the highlights of the scene. The shadows are the darkest areas of the scene. The midtones are the medium brightness areas where most of the detail of the scene resides, and then the highlights is of course the brighter parts of the scene. So you can adjust just the color of the brightest parts of the scene. So you can see back here, this is where it gets really bright because of that's how it is, right? That's where the sun's kind of coming from. It gets really bright back there. So that's why when we adjust this color here, it's adjusting it for this brighter part of the scene. So maybe we want to make that a little bit more blue, for example. We can increase how bright that is and how dark, or maybe this is how much it applies. Oh no, it's the luminance, right? So this here, oh yeah, that would be, yeah, okay, so this is the hue, as you can see. This is the hue, saturation, and luminance. So that's actually what we looked at just before, the hue, saturation, and the luminance. Okay, so I actually just figured that out. I just started understanding this now. If we actually go to just the highlights menu here, we've got the hue, the saturation, and the luminance that we're just messing around with. So this is the hue, we can change that. We can change the saturation of just those blues. It's changing the saturation of just the highlights of the scene. I'm kind of yapping a bit, I feel like. I think I'm kind of yapping a bit, but I think you get the idea. Is using the same idea that we used up here with the hue, saturation, and luminance, we can then apply that to certain parts of the scene. So we can apply this hue, saturation, and luminance to just the shadows of the scene. And then you can of course adjust the midtones as well, which is where most of, as I said before, most of the detail is in the midtones. This is the not super bright and not super dark parts of the scene. You can mess around with all of that and see what you can come up with. So you can go through each of the different shadow, midtones, and highlights there, or you can see them all in the three-way one menu right there. Then there's the blending right here. I'm not sure exactly what that does, but you can see that it does just change how it blends into the scene. Anyway, that's kind of all of the main parts of the camera raw filter. Those are the main things that I use. I'm mainly just using light, color, and effects. I don't really use curves that much. Sometimes I'll use color mixer, and sometimes I'll use color grading, but these two I'll definitely try and start to use a lot more. But anyway, there are a few extra things. I won't be showing you how to use the calibration because I've never really even looked at this before, nor the lens blur, because there's actually a whole nother under filter. Can I click on it? No, I can't. Under filter, there's a whole nother menu for lens blur, which you can actually use, like as I showed in my mist pass tutorial. You can use the mist pass to add like depth field and fog and everything in that lens blur menu. And I think the lens blur is more using like AI and stuff, so I don't really know about all of that. But there's the optics as well, which I showed you before. You can adjust the vignette of the scene, which is pretty nice. And the distortion here, this one is very, very cool. I used this recently in a horror one that I did where it was looking through like the perspective of a security camera. It's warping it like this. It's giving that fisheye lens look. It's very, very cool. Then of course there's detail here, which noise reduction is one that I think I'll try and start to use more, because of course even though you can use denoise and stuff, you can sometimes have a little bit of noise. I don't really have much like visible noise, but if we increase that, you can see the scene gets a lot more flat, which could actually be pretty cool. It could give it a nice little effect if you want to do something like that. And then of course color noise reduction is just removing the noise for specifically colors. You can actually pop both of these open, and in fact you'll have the sharpening here. You can pop that open too and have all these different things, the detail, the contrast, and all of this crazy other settings and things. I don't really use these ones too much. The sharpness here, I've been trying to use this a little bit more recently as well. It's obviously just increasing the sharpness in the scene, which you don't really see much difference there, but it is pretty good because you can open it up as well, right? And you have all these other radius, which the radius controls the thickness of edges that the sharpening affects. So larger values sharpen broader edges. The sharpening detail is adjusting how much like fine detail like of texture, how much texture is actually sharpened. So if we increase that a lot, you get this really like sharpened, like what is this, like a fried effect almost. It's this crazy effect. And then the masking is limiting, it limits the sharpening to edges and prevents it from affecting smoother areas like skies or skin. So if you set this really high, it's going to apply the sharpening to very selective areas. So you see with that low, it's applying to the skin, it's applying to the hat, it's applying to everything. Whereas if you increase that more, you'll see now when I adjust this with the masking set to 100, it's only really applying to like these more like detailed parts of the scene. It's only sharpening the more detailed parts of the scene. So that's all stuff you can mess around with there. I'd mainly just increase this a little bit, and I don't really bother with these other settings, but that's pretty cool if you do want to mess around with those more. And I think that's actually pretty much it. Those are all the settings I use. You can just click OK now, and then you'll see that's the raw one there. Even though I just kind of did some quick adjustments and most of it was spent just explaining all of the different adjustments, we did actually get quite a nice before and after that. You can see it's super great. And then we've got this really nice pure saturated beautiful scene, beautiful scene. Ignore all of this, but you can see if we hide a lot of the things here, if we just have the raw render there, you can see the camera raw filter. If we disable that, we got this really gray bland scene. If we enable that, it brings out a lot more colors and makes it a lot brighter, a lot more visible. So if we actually pop open this camera raw filter, because as I said, work non-destructively, work in a smart object, so then you can always come back and you can change it. Even now I can come back and change and see all my different settings here. So this was all my settings I used on this one. It's really just about, I think, just messing around with it, seeing what looks good and then just going with that. So the texture, clarity, dehaze, as I said, I don't use curves, so curves are there. I don't think I did too much. Oh no, I did mess around with hue of the color mixer, because when I did this, I don't think I even realized there was saturation and luminance you can mess around with there as well. I probably didn't do much with the color grading, and then I did actually mess around with the sharpening a little bit. So there's all of that. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I was able to kind of make you understand camera raw filter a bit more. Camera raw filter isn't the only thing you should do in Photoshop, but it is a big part of my Photoshop post effects workflow, is doing a lot of camera raw filter. But then you got to also do like shading, which I have a tutorial for. You can use like the mist pass, which I mentioned before. I have a tutorial for that too. Just check out the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. We've got a whole bunch of other post effects tutorial. Maybe in the future I'll do like one big post effects tutorial where I show you camera raw filter, I show you shading, I show you my whole post effects process to make some amazing GFX. So if you want to see that, definitely make sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out GFXRhino.com for completely free Roblox GFX assets, and of course, most important thing, join the GFXRhino Discord server, pretty please. We're almost at 1,000 members. First link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We recently got monetized on the channel, so I'm pretty happy about that. We recently got monetized, so thank you all for that. Thank you so much for subscribing and liking and even just watching the video, even if you don't do any of those other things. Thank you for watching. I hope I was able to teach you something. Thank you for giving me views and watch hours and a bit of money. I really appreciate it. Anyway, thank you all very much. I'll see you all next time. Peace out.